On a perfect June morning in Boston, Clara Mitchell stood in front of the large oval mirror in her hotel suite at the Four Seasons Hotel. The sun streamed through the windows, casting a soft glow on her bridal dress. Clara adjusted her veil for the last time, smoothing the delicate fabric over her hair. She smiled at her reflection, her heart racing with excitement as she thought about the day ahead. Her mother, Evelyn, stood beside her, wiping away the tears that had been slowly falling down her face. Evelyn's hands trembled as she reached up to fix a few strands of Clara's curly hair that had escaped from the elegant updo. "You look absolutely stunning, my child," Evelyn whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Clara could feel the love in her mother's words, but she could also sense a quiet sadness in the air. Evelyn was happy for her daughter, but perhaps also a little sad to be letting go. Clara felt beautiful in the dress she had chosen after months of searching. The white gown hugged her curves perfectly, and the tiny hand-stitched crystals glittered in the soft light coming from the windows. Everything was falling into place. This was the day she had dreamed about since she was a little girl, a day when she would marry the man she loved, Gabriel Romano. They had met 2 years earlier at a business conference in Chicago, and since then their relationship had blossomed. Today, at 32 years old, Clara was going to marry the man of her dreams. But just as Clara adjusted her veil one final time, her cell phone buzzed. She ignored it, too caught up in the moment, too focused on the happiness that was supposed to unfold in the next few hours. The phone buzzed again, then again, 5 times in total. Clara chose to remain focused, but when the phone vibrated for the 6th time, Evelyn's voice broke through the silence. "I need to answer this, darling," Evelyn said, her voice shaky as she picked up the phone. Clara, still lost in her reflection, couldn't hear what was being said on the other end, but she could see the sudden change in her mother's face. Evelyn's skin went pale, her eyes widening in shock. She put her hand over her mouth, struggling to find words. "What do you mean?" Evelyn whispered, her voice quivering. "No, that can't be true." Clara's stomach churned with unease. Her mother's distress was palpable. Evelyn spoke again, her voice barely audible, but Clara could hear the next words clearly. "Gabriel left. He's not coming," Evelyn whispered. Clara froze, her heart nearly stopping in her chest. The next words that came from her mother hit like a punch to the gut. "He's with Natalie, his ex-wife. He left early this morning for New York, and he's decided to be with her." The world around Clara seemed to slow down. The wedding, the guests, the dress, the excitement, all of it faded into a blur. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe, as her mind processed the crushing news. Gabriel, the man she had built her future around, had just shattered everything. She stood motionless in front of the mirror, unable to make sense of what was happening. Outside, she could hear the faint noise of guests arriving, excited for the celebration that was supposed to take place. "I need to do something," Clara muttered, her voice firm, even though her heart was breaking. "I need to warn everyone." "No, dear, let me take care of that," Evelyn urged, her voice shaky with panic. But Clara was already walking toward the door. She didn't know what she was doing, but she knew she couldn't just sit there, waiting for everything to fall apart around her. When Clara entered the grand hall, decorated with white orchids and crystals, the guests fell silent. They had been expecting to see the radiant bride walking down the stairs to her limousine, but instead they saw Clara standing tall, her chin held high, though her eyes were red and swollen. "The wedding is off," Clara's voice rang out, clear and steady, cutting through the room. "Gabriel has decided his future lies with someone else. I thank you all for coming, but I ask you to go home now." The room was filled with stunned silence, broken only by the shuffle of guests who didn't know how to react. Clara's heart ached, but she stood firm. Her voice echoed through the hall, her pain hidden behind the cold resolve of her words. As Clara stood there, her eyes met a familiar face near the entrance. It was Luca Foster, her childhood friend. She hadn't seen him in years, but in that moment, she recognized the same expression of concern that had been there when they were kids, the same look he always gave her when she had fallen on the playground, and he had been the first one to reach out and help her stand up. Their eyes locked for a brief moment, and in that split second, Clara knew that Luca understood. She didn't have to say anything more. The next few hours passed in a blur of sympathetic faces, awkward hugs, and empty words. People tried to comfort her, but their words didn't help. Clara stood, tall and silent, refusing to cry in front of anyone. But when the last guest had left and the hall was empty, she allowed her legs to weaken. She collapsed into an armchair in the hotel lobby, feeling every ounce of her pain catch up with her. Luca, who had stayed quietly in the background, stepped forward. He sat down beside her without saying a word. He didn't try to fix anything. He simply offered his presence, knowing that sometimes silence was the best comfort. "Did you know this could happen?" Clara whispered, her voice barely audible. "No," Luca answered honestly, "but I always knew you deserved better." Clara's eyes filled with tears, but she fought to keep them in. She glanced at her engagement ring, still shining on her finger, and it felt like a cruel reminder of everything that had been promised but was now lost. "I have to cancel the honeymoon," Clara said quietly, her voice distant as she spoke about all the things she needed to do to fix everything. "And the contracts with the suppliers, the gifts, I have to return them all." Lucas shook his head gently. "You don't have to do anything right now. It's okay." And with that, Clara's tears came. The floodgates opened, and she cried like she hadn't in years. Lucas stayed by her side, quietly offering his support as she let her emotions pour out. He didn't try to stop her. He just let her cry. And in that moment, Clara realized that sometimes the truest love wasn't in grand gestures or promises, but in the silent presence of someone who had always been there, even when they weren't noticed. A week had passed since the wedding that never was. Clara was back at work at Mitchell Enterprises, the financial consulting firm she had built from the ground up. It was a busy day, but her mind kept drifting back to that day in the hotel. Her mother had been there, Luca had been there, but Gabriel had not. And now she was left with the pieces of a life she had thought she would share with him. Her secretary, Zoe, knocked softly on her office door and entered with a fresh cup of coffee. "Miss Mitchell, I brought your coffee," she said, then hesitated before adding, "Another bouquet came for you. It's from Mr. Romano." Clara sighed deeply, the weight of the situation hitting her all over again. She had already received 9 other arrangements of flowers from Gabriel, each one more extravagant than the last. "Please, donate them to a hospital like the others," Clara replied, her voice flat. Zoe nodded but didn't leave. She lingered, clearly unsure whether to bring up the next piece of news. Finally, she spoke. "There's also a letter. It's from Mr. Foster." Clara's heart skipped a beat. Luca had respected her space since that night in the hotel lobby, not reaching out at all, so this was unexpected. Zoe placed the letter on Clara's desk, and Clara opened it. Inside was a simple card with Luca's familiar handwriting. "Remember when we were 12 and you broke your arm trying to save that cat from the oak tree? You cried not from pain, but because you thought you had failed to help the cat. The next day, even with a cast, you were trying again. That's the Clara I know, the one who never gives up, even when she's hurt. Lunch today?" A smile tugged at Clara's lips. She hadn't smiled in days, but this letter brought a small piece of joy. She picked up her phone and typed a quick reply. "Noon. Charles Street Cafe." The message came back instantly. "I'll be there." The rest of the day went by in a blur of meetings and phone calls, but Clara found herself counting down the minutes until lunchtime. At noon, she left the office and walked to the cafe on Charles Street. When she arrived, Luca was already there, sitting at a small table in the back. He stood up when he saw her, his face showing concern as he noticed how pale she looked. "Clara?" he he said softly. You okay? She nodded, trying to force a smile. I saw a picture of Gabriel and Natalie this morning. It hurt more than I thought it would. Luca's face softened. He reached for the menu, but then hesitated. Do you want to order something? Maybe hot chocolate like we used to drink in school? I remember everything, Clara replied, her voice quiet but steady. Everything, Luca. Clara stood up and threw her engagement ring into the river. The ring sparkled one last time in the fading sunlight before disappearing into the dark water. She sat back down and asked, Can we open that wine now? Luca poured the wine without saying anything. He looked at Clara's face. She looked different, lighter, like she wasn't carrying a heavy burden anymore. I've spent so long trying to be perfect for someone else that I forgot how to be myself, Clara said after taking a sip. And who are you, Clara Mitchell? Luca asked. She looked down at the river where her ring had disappeared. I'm still figuring that out, but for the first time in a long time, I'm excited to find out, she answered. Luca raised his glass and said, Here's to discovery. And their glasses clinked together softly as the last bit of sunlight turned the sky red. Clara realized that sometimes you have to let something go before you can move forward. Winter came to Boston, and Clara watched the snow fall outside her new apartment. It wasn't as big as her old one, but it was hers. She had moved after a long night of thinking about her old apartment and the memories there. Zoe, Clara's close friend who worked as her secretary, was helping her organize things. This place really suits you, Zoe said. I still need to decorate more, Clara replied, looking around at the few pieces of furniture. But at least there are no ghosts. The doorbell rang, and a delivery man brought lunch. As they ate, Zoe hesitated. Have you seen the news about Romano Enterprises? She asked. Clara stopped eating, her fork halfway to her mouth. No, she replied. Zoe explained that the company was close to going bankrupt, and Natalie, who had worked there, had taken all the money and left for Europe with a yoga instructor. Clara couldn't help but laugh. Sorry, she said. It just feels like karma, doesn't it? Just then, her neighbor, William Stanford, knocked on the door. He needed her help with a condo meeting. Clara agreed and quickly went downstairs. To her surprise, Luca was also there. He had been hired as the architect for the project. They smiled at each other, and Clara's heart warmed a little. The meeting went on for hours, with everyone arguing about costs and materials. Clara listened to Luca talk about the project, defending his ideas with passion. You always knew exactly what you wanted to be, didn't you? She asked him later as they walked through the snow in Boston Common. Not always, Luca replied. There was a time I thought about being a musician. Clara laughed, remembering his terrible attempts at playing the guitar when they were teenagers. Hey, I wasn't that bad, Luca said. You made our music teacher cry. They both laughed, but then something changed. There was a new, quiet tension between them. Luca stopped walking and looked serious. I need to tell you something, he said, his heart racing. I've been offered a project in Seattle. It's for 6 months. The news hit Clara like a freeze. I haven't decided yet, Luca continued. But I wanted to talk to you first. His eyes were searching hers. Why? Clara asked quietly, feeling something stir in her chest. Because over the last few months, you've become the most important person in my life again, Luca said softly. And I don't want to leave things unsaid this time. Before Clara could answer, Luca's phone rang. It was Zoe, telling her about a problem at the office. I have to go, Clara said, feeling a mix of relief and frustration. I understand, Luca said, smiling. Go ahead. Later, Clara dealt with the office problem automatically, but her mind kept wandering to the thought of Luca leaving for Seattle. She felt a strange fear she had never felt before. When she got home that night, she found a small envelope under her door. Inside was a drawing of the terrace project. It was from Luca, with a note saying, Some things take time, but they are worth the wait. Clara touched the paper, feeling that the project wasn't just about the terrace, but about something much bigger. something Luca had been building for longer than she had realized. The next day, news spread that Romano Enterprises had gone bankrupt. Clara read the headlines, her emotions mixed. Her phone rang with a message from Luca. Meeting in Seattle next week. Dinner before I go. It had been 3 weeks since their conversation, and Clara still hadn't decided how she felt about Luca's possible move. Just then, Zoe came running into Clara's office. You need to see this, she said, showing Clara a viral video of Gabriel, her ex, being pulled out of a bar, drunk and shouting her name. It was all over the news, and people were linking it to the bankruptcy. Clara's voice was firm as she told Zoe, we have the presentation with the Chinese investors in an hour. Let's focus on that. During the meeting, Clara's mind wandered, but she did the job perfectly, speaking with confidence. After the meeting, she canceled her afternoon plans and drove to the harbor, where she stood watching the boats in the cold wind. Her phone rang again. It was Luca. I saw the news, he said. It's nothing, Clara said quickly. You don't have to always be strong, he told her. His voice was gentle, and it made Clara's heart ache. You're not responsible for his choices, Luca continued. It's not that simple, Clara said. I wonder if I'm destroying something by not giving you an answer. Luca's voice was soft but steady. I know, he said. But I just want you to know that the decision about Seattle can wait. You don't have to rush. Just then, Clara's phone rang. It was Gabriel. She hesitated before answering, but then Luca asked, What do you want to do? Clara looked out at the choppy water and said, I want to have dinner with you before you go to Seattle. The next day, she blocked Gabriel's number for good. She felt lighter, no longer weighed down by him. That night, when Luca picked her up for dinner, she noticed something different in his eyes, a mixture of hope and fear, just like how she felt. Before they left, Clara took Luca to her office, where she had put up a vision board with her dreams and goals for the future. I started this after you mentioned Seattle, she explained. I realized I had been so focused on fixing the past that I wasn't planning for my future. Luca looked at the board and smiled. One of the notes said, learning to trust again. I still need time, Clara said, but maybe that's exactly the time I need to rebuild myself to be the person you deserve. Luca looked at her with tears in his eyes. You're already more than I could ever deserve, he whispered. The storm outside was growing stronger, but inside something new was beginning. The next morning, Clara watched Luca go through airport security. She felt sad, but she also felt stronger. Promise you'll take care of yourself? She asked him. I promise, he said. As he went to board his plane, he hugged her tightly. Seattle isn't that far, he said. 289 miles, Clara said, making him laugh. You really did your research, he said. I'm a numbers woman, she replied with a smile, hiding her emotions. When Luca finally disappeared through the boarding gate, Clara stayed still, watching the planes through the big window. Her phone buzzed with a message from Zoe, reminding her of a board meeting in an hour. The day had gone by quickly with lots of important work. Mitchell Enterprises was growing, taking on clients from the company Romano Enterprises, which had gone out of business. Clara worked even harder, as if each busy minute meant less time to think about how far away Luca was in Seattle. That evening, alone in her big apartment, Clara got ready for a video call with her therapist, Dr. Jenna Russell. How are you feeling about Luca leaving? Jenna asked after saying hello. Clara, confused, admitted, It feels like I found something really special, and then it just disappeared. Jenna kindly said, He's not gone, Clara. He's just giving you both space to grow. Clara asked, What if we grow in different directions? Jenna thought for a moment and then asked, Are you more scared of growing apart or of growing together in a different way? Clara thought about Jenna's question. After everything that happened with Gabriel, Clara had built walls around her heart. Letting someone in felt really scary. Just then, her phone rang. It was Luca, sending a picture of the view from his hotel room in Seattle, with the Space Needle in the background. He wrote, "Different from Boston, but it has its charm." Clara smiled and showed Jenna the picture. She said, "He always finds beauty in the most unexpected places, even in me when I couldn't see it myself." Jenna smiled and replied, "He sees what you couldn't." In the next few weeks, Clara's routine was full of work. She spent mornings with the company, which was growing quickly. Afternoons were filled with meetings, and sometimes she would visit the building's terrace, where Luca's design was slowly being built. Every evening, she had a video call with Luca. They talked about their days, their projects, and their dreams. Luca talked about the work he was doing to make things more sustainable, and Clara shared her business success. One evening, during a call, Luca said, "You're different." Clara was curious. "What do you mean?" she asked. Luca smiled and said, "Your eyes light up when you talk about your work now. Before, it seemed like you were always trying to prove something." Clara thought about this after the call. She looked at her vision board, which was now full of new ideas. In the center was an old photo of her and Luca from high school, smiling at the camera. The next morning, Clara's phone rang. It was Zoe with big news. Natalie, Gabriel's ex-wife, had given an interview to a gossip magazine saying Gabriel had never forgotten Clara. Clara, however, didn't care. Natalie's words, which would have hurt her in the past, didn't matter anymore. What mattered was Luca's messages and the person he was becoming. That evening, sitting on her terrace, Clara wrote in her diary, "Maybe the greatest proof of love isn't staying, but giving the other person space to grow." Luca always knew, while I was building walls, he was building bridges. 2,489 miles of bridges between Boston and Seattle. And for the first time, I'm not afraid to cross them. The cold Boston wind blew, but Clara didn't feel cold. Something inside her was finally starting to grow, helped by the distance that was bringing her closer to herself. Spring arrived in Boston, bringing bright colors and some surprising news. Clara was in her office when Zoe came in, holding the Wall Street Journal with shaking hands. "Romano Enterprises is being bought," Zoe said. Clara took the paper and read the headline. Chen Innovations, led by Sophia Tan, had bought Romano Enterprises. Sophia wanted Clara's company, Mitchell Enterprises, to help restructure it. "I know about your history with Gabriel," Sophia said, "but you understand change. We need you." That evening, Clara told Luca about the meeting with Sophia. "What do you think?" she asked. Luca thought for a moment and said, "I think you've already made up your mind. Your eyes light up when you talk about it." Clara admitted, "It's scary to think about being in that world again." Luca smiled, "But you're not the same person who was hurt. You're the person who rebuilt." The next day, Clara's mother, Evelyn, called. She sounded nervous but excited. "I'm dating someone," Evelyn said. Clara was shocked. Since her father's death, her mother hadn't shown interest in anyone else. Evelyn explained that it was Professor Grant from the university. It started with talks about medieval books, and then it just happened. Clara looked at her mother and saw the change in her. She was glowing with happiness. "Are you happy?" Clara asked. "I'm learning to be," Evelyn said. Clara smiled, realizing it was Luca who had introduced them during a charity event. He always knew, Clara thought. The next morning, Clara had clarity. She agreed to help restructure Romano Enterprises and dove into the work. Every number she worked on, every plan she made was a step toward fixing something broken and turning it into something new. The terrace was almost finished, with plants growing where Luca had designed a vertical garden. Clara often found herself touching the leaves, amazed at how something so fragile could be so strong. One afternoon, Clara's phone rang. It was Luca. "I need to tell you something," he said, his voice serious. Clara's heart squeezed. "I've received an offer to extend the project for another 3 months," he said. Clara looked around at the plants Luca had designed. She thought about how some things needed time to grow. "You should accept it," Clara said. "You deserve it." She paused and added, just like you gave me space to grow, I need to do the same for you. Luca laughed softly. You're finally learning. I had a good teacher, Clara smiled. Later that evening, Clara wrote in her diary, Mom is learning to love again. Sophia is turning ruins into opportunities, and I'm discovering that some distances don't separate, they clarify. Like spring after winter, sometimes we need absence to recognize what has always been there. Her phone buzzed with another message from Luca. It was a picture of the sunset in Seattle, with the caption, Some moments are more beautiful when shared even from a distance. Clara looked up at the sky in Boston, where the same sun was setting. For the first time, the distance didn't seem so big. Summer came with hot weather and many surprises. Clara was busy with the restructuring of Romano Enterprises, now called Chen Innovations. Then Zoe burst into her office with a worried face. Gabriel is here, she said. Clara froze. After months of being away, Gabriel had returned, looking different, thinner and tired, but his eyes were clear. You look beautiful, he said, and then he explained, as part of my recovery, I have to make amends. You're at the top of my list. Gabriel apologized, and Clara felt something shift inside her. She didn't forgive him, but she understood. He had changed. After he left, Clara got a call from Luca, but she didn't answer. Later, he sent her a message. Sorry, complicated day. Can we talk tonight? That evening, they had their call. Gabriel came to my office today, Clara said. Luca seemed tense. He told her, I've been offered a permanent job in Seattle with one of the biggest sustainable architecture firms. Clara's world seemed to stop. Permanent? She asked. Yes, Luca said. Clara forced a smile and said, You deserve it. Gabriel, Luca said. What did he want? Clara told him about the visit, the apology, and the recovery program. Have you forgiven him? Luca asked. I don't know if it's forgiveness, Clara replied. It's more like acceptance. You lie. Some things need to break down before they can be rebuilt, just like us. The call ended and Clara went out to the terrace. The plants Luca had designed were in full bloom, creating a peaceful space under the stars. Her phone vibrated with a message from her mom. Love doesn't have an expiration date. Sometimes it just needs the right moment. Clara smiled and wrote in her diary, Today, the past and the future collided. Gabriel came to make peace with who he was, and Luca makes me question who I can be. Then, she got a message from Sophia Tan. Meeting tomorrow in Seattle with potential investors. I need you there. Seattle, the same place where Luca might stay permanently. Clara replied simply, I'll be there, and sent Luca another message. I'll be in Seattle tomorrow. His reply came quickly. Dinner? Clara typed back, I think it's time for some conversations that can't be done by video. The stars shone brightly over Boston, just like the stars Luca could see in Seattle. Clara was thinking about how some things in life need to stay the way they are so we can understand what really matters, while other things need to change so we can move forward. She had just arrived in Seattle, and the weather was so different from the hot summer she had left behind in Boston. It was a rainy day, with a light drizzle falling from the sky. From the top of the building, where Chen Innovations would have its meeting, Clara could see the famous Space Needle poking out from the gray clouds, just like the first photo Luca had shared with her when they were apart. The meeting with investors went very well. Clara and Sophia worked perfectly together. When the meeting was over, contracts were signed and everyone shook hands. As they relaxed with coffee after the meeting, Sophia mentioned, I should think about opening an office here in Seattle. The city is becoming a hub for new tech companies. Clara gazed out the window at the city and thought about the suggestion. Maybe, she replied, though her thoughts were elsewhere. Just then, her phone buzzed with a message from Luca. Are we still on for dinner? I have something to show you first. The address he sent her led to a neighborhood in the hills of Seattle. When Clara arrived, Luca was waiting for her outside with a black umbrella. Welcome to Seattle. Luca said with a smile that made Clara's heart beat faster. She hadn't seen him in months. "What do you want to show me?" she asked. Luca led her through a path lined with tall old trees until they reached a beautiful house. It was a two-story home made of wood and glass, blending perfectly into the natural surroundings. "This is my project," Luca explained, unlocking the door. "This is why I was offered a permanent position here." Clara stepped inside. The house was incredible. Every detail reflected Luca's love for sustainability and nature. Big windows framed the view of the city, and an indoor garden connected the rooms in the house. "It's amazing," Clara whispered, touching one of the walls made from recycled wood. Luca smiled. "Come upstairs. I want to show you something." They walked to the second floor, where a big office had a panoramic view of the city. In the center of the room were drawings and blueprints spread out on a clipboard. "Are these other projects?" Clara asked as she looked closer. "Ideas for Boston," Luca replied quietly. Clara froze. "But the permanent position here?" she asked, feeling confused. "There are some choices in life," Luca began, "and then there are decisions we make because our hearts already know what they want." He walked toward her. "I spent months here building something incredible, but no matter what I did, every project and every idea always brought me back to Boston, to you." Tears filled Clara's eyes. She stepped back. "I can't let you give up this opportunity because of me," she whispered. Luca wiped away a tear that had fallen down her cheek. "I'm not giving up anything," he said gently. "The firm has offered me the chance to open an office in Boston, and I want us to do it together." Clara blinked, surprised. "You didn't tell me earlier because you needed to be sure?" she asked. "Not of the job," Luca said softly, "but of us." Just then, the rain outside grew heavier, turning into a steady downpour, and the sound of the raindrops on the windows filled the room, making the moment feel even more special. "You know what's funny?" Clara asked, her voice shaking slightly. "I came to Seattle thinking I'd tell you that I was going to open an office here, and we'd try to make it work." Luca laughed softly. "Always trying to fix everything, aren't you? Old habits." "You don't need to fix everything, Clara," Luca said, holding his hands up. "Some things don't need fixing. They just need to be lived." Their dinner plans were forgotten, and instead they ordered Chinese food, sitting on the office floor, talking like old friends. Clara told Luca about meeting Gabriel and how free she felt afterward. Luca shared what he had been doing in Seattle. He said every success he had there only made him think of Clara. "Do you remember that photo from graduation?" Luca asked. "The one on my vision board?" Clara smiled. "You had a speech ready, right?" she asked. Luca laughed. "I was going to tell you how I felt about you that day, but I saw how excited you were about your business school dreams, and I realized we needed to live our lives separately first before we could build something together." "And now?" Clara asked, feeling hopeful. "And now," Luca said, standing up and offering her his hand, "I think we're finally ready to build something new together." The rain slowed down, leaving Seattle sparkling under the city lights. The view from the house looked like a field of stars, and Clara, smiling, took Luca's hand. "Are we going back to Boston?" she asked. Luca looked at her with a soft smile. "Back home," he said. The return to Boston felt like the start of a new chapter for Clara. The city was turning gold and red as autumn took over. Clara oversaw the installation of new furniture for Mitchell Enterprises in their brand new office. "The architects are arriving next week," Zoe told Clara, looking at her tablet. "Luca has already approved the plans." Clara smiled when she heard Luca's name. In the weeks since Seattle, their lives had come together in ways that felt both new and familiar. Zoe interrupted Clara's thoughts. "Sophia Tan is on the phone," she said. Clara's conversation with Sophia was brief but important. Chen Innovations was doing well under new management, and the rumors about Gabriel Romano were changing. There were talks of new projects, new opportunities, and redemption. "He's really changing," Sophia said on the phone. Sometimes we need to lose everything to find our true purpose. After work, Clara drove to Luca's new office in the South End. The space was still under construction, but it already showed Luca's unique style: walls made of recycled glass, vertical gardens, and lots of natural light. "I like the new sign," Clara said as she entered. "It looks great." Luca, who was standing behind a pile of plants, smiled. "I'm still not used to this," he admitted. "Having my own office, knowing I'm building something that's truly mine." "You're doing it," Clara said softly, feeling proud of him. Luca paused, then turned to Clara. "Speaking of building," he said, "Mom wants us to have dinner with her and Professor Grant on Sunday." "So it's official now?" Luca smiled. "Apparently, yes. He proposed to her yesterday," Clara replied. "She's overjoyed. She's finally letting herself have a new beginning." "I'm happy for her," Luca said. He pulled Clara into a hug as they watched the sunset through the office windows. "Your mother has always been wise." "I know," Clara said, smiling. "Do you regret waiting so long for us?" she asked. Luca thought for a moment before answering. "No," he said. "Every moment brought us to exactly where we need to be." That evening, Clara and Luca walked through Boston Common and met Gabriel. Their meeting was brief. It was just a nod and a polite smile, but Clara felt something unexpected, a sense of peace. Gabriel, the man who once broke her heart, now felt as distant as the autumn leaves blowing in the wind. At home, Clara added a new photo to her vision board. Next to her old graduation photo, she placed a new one of herself and Luca in Seattle, smiling in the rain. She thought about all the years of growing up, the pain, the lessons learned, and how they had finally found each other again. Just then, her phone vibrated. It was Sophia again. "Board meeting tomorrow. I have an interesting proposal to discuss." "There's always more to build," Luca said, noticing Clara's thoughtful expression. "Speaking of building," he said, reaching into his briefcase, "I want to show you something." It was a project plan, with elevations and renderings of a house that combined elements of both Boston and Seattle, tradition and innovation, the past and the future. "It's beautiful," Clara whispered as she studied the plans. Luca looked at her nervously. "It's ours," he said softly, "if you want it." Clara's eyes widened. "Have you already bought the land?" she asked. "The lot in Brookline you've always admired," Luca admitted. "I know it's a big step." "It's perfect," Clara said, her voice full of emotion. Later, as they sat on the terrace of their new home under construction, Clara thought about how life sometimes works in perfect circles. There she was, planning a future with the man who had always been part of her past, building something new on old foundations. "What are you thinking about?" Luca asked, noticing Clara's distant gaze. "I was thinking about how sometimes we need to tear things down so we can build something better," she said. Luca smiled, understanding perfectly. "And some things just need the right moment to bloom," he said. Winter came to Boston with a heavy snowstorm that blanketed the city in white. Clara watched the snow from the temporary office she had set up in the new house. Luca's project was moving along quickly, even with the cold weather. The special glass walls of the house let in lots of natural light while keeping the warmth inside, making the space feel like it was both inside and outside at once. Zoe was there, helping with the details. "The furniture is coming next week," she told Clara. "The place is looking great. Is everything ready for tonight?" Clara asked as they prepared for another visit. Just then, Luca appeared in the doorway, snow melting on his coat. "We have a visitor," he said. To Clara's surprise, Sophia Tan was standing there, dressed elegantly in a red coat. "Impressive," Sophia said, looking around. "Exactly as I imagined." Sophia looked at Luca. "Chen Innovations is starting a sustainable development division, and we want you two to lead it." Clara and Luca exchanged looks. This was a huge opportunity. "It's a partnership?" Luca asked. "More than that," Sophia said with a smile. "A fusion of talents, your financial experience, Clara's architectural vision, and our technology. Together, We can change the real estate market. After Sophia left, Clara and Luca walked through the house under construction. What do you think? Luca asked. I think it's scary, Clara admitted. Mixing work and personal life. It's like mixing the past and the present. Luca smiled. Just like our history, he said softly. Clara's phone rang. It was her mom. Evelyn was excited about her upcoming wedding to Professor Grant. You're coming to dinner tonight, right? Evelyn asked. David wants to discuss ideas for the ceremony. That evening, Clara and Luca went to Evelyn's house for dinner. The ceremony was small, just close family and friends in the university garden. Clara helped Evelyn get ready, and as they spoke, her mother seemed younger, more alive than she had in years. At dinner, Professor Grant was full of enthusiasm, and Clara realized something important. All the big changes in her life had started with a moment of courage. That night, Clara sat with Evelyn in the garden, looking at the stars. Are you happy? Clara asked. I'm happier than I thought I could be, Evelyn replied, smiling. Me too, Clara said, looking at Luca, who was talking to David. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Do you know what your father used to say? Evelyn asked softly. Love is like architecture. It needs a solid foundation, time to build, and constant maintenance. Clara laughed. Luca would say the same thing. Wise men think alike, Evelyn said, winking as they both looked up at the stars. Thank you for watching. If you like this story and want to see more, please subscribe to our channel. That way you won't miss any new videos. Give us a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and share what you think in the comments. We love hearing your thoughts. Also, don't forget to check out the other videos on our channel. We'll see you in the next story.